President Lee Jae-myung held separate talks with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng in Seoul on Wednesday, ahead of a summit between Washington and Beijing set to take place in China the following day. South Korea is reviewing possible participation in a U.S.-led mission to restore freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, while Seoul officials say there is still no definitive evidence linking last week's attack on the Korean-operated HMM Namu to drone strikes. Also on Wednesday, President Lee Jae-myung visited a shipyard building LNG carriers, highlighting Korea's growing global prominence in the shipbuilding industry. Ahead of Thursday's summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing, President Lee Jae-myung held separate talks with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng at the Blue House on Wednesday. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yu-jin leads our coverage tonight.
A day before the highly anticipated summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Lee Jae-myung met with senior officials from both countries at the Blue House. Lee held talks with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, marking their second meeting following their first in New York last September. As widely expected, Seoul's pledged $350 billion investment package in exchange for lower U.S. tariffs was among the issues discussed.
President Lee asked Secretary Bessent to help ensure that the investment agreement leads to broader cooperation in key economic and strategic sectors based on the strong trust between Seoul and Washington, creating mutual benefits for both countries.
The two sides also agreed on the need to strengthen cooperation in supply chains and the foreign exchange market at a time of growing global uncertainties. Just before that, President Lee met with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng. Lee's back-to-back meetings came ahead of trade talks between He and Bessent aimed at coordinating key issues before the Trump-Xi summit in Beijing.
President Lee said stable ties between the United States and China would greatly contribute to the development and prosperity of countries around the world, including Korea. Vice Premier He expressed appreciation for Korea's support in hosting the talks.
When asked why the trade talks were being held in Korea this time, Kang said the negotiations could be viewed as an effort to advance and finalize discussions from the previous Trump-Xi summit in Busan last October. On bilateral ties, President Lee asked the Chinese vice premier to play an active role in maintaining close communication in areas including the economy and culture. He in turn said he would do his utmost to ensure the smooth implementation of agreements reached during the two summits between Presidents Lee and Xi. With Seoul maintaining its alliance with Washington while also preserving its strategic cooperative partnership with Beijing, Wednesday's meetings could be viewed as its delicate balancing act between the world's two superpowers. Song Yu-jin, Arirang News.
Iran has reportedly called on China for diplomatic support to halt hostilities with the U.S. Our Lee Seung-jae covers this call as well as the risks of a wider war in the Middle East.
Iranian state media says Tehran has asked China to help represent its position ahead of U.S. President Donald Trump's upcoming visit to Beijing, as tensions across the Middle East continue to rise. Iran's ambassador to China said Tehran is seeking a permanent end to the war, a stable ceasefire framework, sanctions relief, and recognition of what it calls Iran's legitimate rights. He added that China is well positioned among major global powers to deliver Iran's message. Iran is also reportedly working through mediators, including China and Pakistan, to pressure the United States toward a ceasefire, while continuing to stress its control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Revolutionary Guard said surveillance in the strategic waterway has been strengthened and vowed to defend Iran's territorial and maritime sovereignty. Meanwhile, Reuters reported Tuesday that Saudi Arabia carried out previously undisclosed airstrikes inside Iran in late March in retaliation for earlier attacks on Saudi territory. If confirmed, these strikes would mark the first known direct Saudi military action on Iranian soil. The report did not confirm which targets were hit. Separately, Kuwait says it arrested 4 men accused of belonging to Iran's Revolutionary Guard after they allegedly tried to infiltrate Kuwait's strategically important Bubiyan Island. Kuwaiti authorities said a soldier was wounded during a confrontation. Iran's foreign ministry denied the allegations and demanded the immediate release of the 4 Iranian nationals. Tehran acknowledged the sailors had entered Kuwaiti waters due to a navigation system malfunction, not for a covert military mission. Lee Jae, Arirang News.
National Security Advisor Wi says there's no conclusive evidence that drones struck the Korean-operated Namu vessel in the Strait of Hormuz last week. Speaking at a conference hosted by the Korean News Editors Association on Wednesday, Wi said further investigation and analysis are needed before making a final determination. He added that authorities are considering multiple possibilities regarding the unidentified flying objects, including missiles. Now, this comes after the UAE's Foreign Ministry on Monday condemned the incident as a terrorist drone attack. In the meantime, South Korea says it's actively discussing ways to contribute to international efforts aimed at ensuring safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Our Jung Hae-rim reports.
South Korea's National Security Advisor Wi stated on Wednesday that the government is actively engaged in international discussions to ensure the safe passage in the Strait of Hormuz. During a briefing in Seoul, Wi noted that South Korea is communicating closely with key international partners, also noting that the United States had proposed cooperation under its maritime initiative, Project Freedom. This direction aligns with the recent outcomes of Defense Minister An Gyu-baek's high-level talks in Washington with U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at the Pentagon earlier this week. An said Seoul is reviewing phased contributions to U.S.-led efforts aimed at restoring safe passage through the strait. Speaking to reporters in Washington on Tuesday local time, An said Seoul conveyed to Washington that it would participate as a responsible member of the international community and review ways to contribute in stages. According to An, possible forms of support could include expressions of political backing, personnel dispatches, intelligence sharing, and military asset assistance. The minister stressed that any decision would be made in accordance with both international and domestic legal procedures, adding that no detailed discussions were held regarding direct South Korean military involvement. An also stated that Seoul reaffirmed its push for a transfer of wartime operational control, or OPCON, before the first quarter of 2029 target presented by U.S. Forces Korea Commander General Xavier Brunson last month. The defense minister said Seoul explained its efforts to increase defense spending and strengthen military capabilities as part of preparations for a South Korea-led defense posture on the Korean peninsula, but acknowledged slight differences between Seoul and Washington regarding the transfer. An also said the allies discussed South Korea's push to build nuclear-powered submarines, adding that both countries agreed on the need to begin working-level consultations as soon as possible, despite ongoing regional tensions involving Iran. The talks did not include discussions on a reduction of U.S. troops stationed in South Korea, nor did they discuss the potential relocation of THAAD batteries to the Middle East. Jung Hae-rim, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung on Wednesday went out to a shipyard to seek ways to raise the country's shipbuilding competitiveness. Noting the sector as a promising business, he called for a system where outcomes can be equally shared. Yoon Jung-min has more.
Hitting the road on Wednesday to the country's southeastern city of Ulsan, President Lee Jae-myung toured a shipyard where LNG carriers are built. Meeting with shipbuilders, he noted growing recognition of South Korea's shipbuilding industry on the global stage.
국제적인 관심도가 높아지다가 소위 마스가라고 미국의 대규모 투자 사업의 핵심 아이템으로 조선 산업이 또 선정돼 있기도 합니다. 앞으로 이 부분은 매우 여러 가지 많은 가능성과 잠재력을 가지고 있는데.
He was looking for what the government can do to help, noting a great discrepancy during times of a boom and recession, which also affects the livelihoods of workers in the field. The president called for creating a fair compensation system.
그 성장의 과실들이 골고루 좀 나눠지고 또 회사 내에서도 사용자와 노동자가 함께 그 과실을 누릴 수 있는 그런 시스템을 만드는 것도 중요한 일일 것 같습니다.
High on the agenda was raising its competitiveness amid a fierce global race.
If China excels in the LNG carrier sector, it's hard for us to catch up. We own the building technology, but what's key is demonstration, especially for large vessels.
Some have called for more support in financing.
Smaller shipbuilders like us have no choice but to give up major contracts because we couldn't get a refund guarantee.
Present were major and smaller shipbuilders alike, representatives of workers in the field, and financial institutions. After the session, President Lee toured an exhibition booth showcasing robots and cutting-edge technologies applied in the shipbuilding sector. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump is set to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing on May 14th and 15th, with trade, Taiwan, Iran, and North Korea potentially featuring in their talks. Now, the summit comes after a year and a half of renewed volatility in U.S.-China ties and efforts by both sides to stabilize the relationship. For more, our correspondent Oh Soo-young joins us in the studio. Welcome back, Soo-young.
Hi, Tammy.
So, Soo-young, this is, of course, a highly anticipated summit amid the ongoing rivalry and also tension between the two sides. Now, first, what are the two leaders hoping to achieve this time?
Well, it looks like both sides are looking for stability, Tammy. So when Presidents Trump and Xi met last October in Busan, well, they agreed to a limited trade truce in which Beijing would maintain rare earth exports to the U.S. for about 12 months, while Washington reduced some tariffs and paused additional trade measures. But time is running out on that agreement, of course. So experts believe that the two sides are expected to discuss extending that truce and setting up new trade and investment committees to manage future disputes more regularly.
So I think the most important thing that people would like to see, I think, is some degree of stability in the U.S.-China relationship. For both the United States, for China, for countries like South Korea, it's just been so erratic and variable over the first year and a half of the Trump administration. Tariffs, critical mineral cutoffs by China. Nobody wants to see this anymore. People want to see if we can at least buy a year of predictability and stability.
The summit's shaping up to be heavily business-focused as well. NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, Elon Musk, Apple's Tim Cook, and Boeing's Kelly Ortberg are expected to join Trump's delegation, with possible deals including aircraft, agriculture, and energy.
Now, Soo-young, on top of trade, there are quite a few sensitive issues. How would they be navigated?
Yes, there definitely are a number of hot-button issues, Taiwan, of course, being the most politically charged. So, of course, Beijing has long opposed, it's long regarded Taiwan as part of China and opposes growing U.S. military support for the island, while Washington has continued arms sales and deeper security cooperation with Taipei. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi recently warned U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio that Taiwan remains the biggest risk in bilateral relations. Trump has meanwhile said that he expects to discuss U.S. arms sales to Taiwan directly with Xi Jinping. Now, there's also been growing concern in Washington that Beijing could push for softer U.S. language on Taiwan in exchange for economic concessions. However, experts, including Dr. Cha, say that might not necessarily be the case.
I really don't think that that is a likely outcome. China is looking for a degree of stability coming out of this and predictability, at least for a year coming out of this. And so the last thing they want to do is try to pull a fast one on Trump that he would then get mad at, and then we'd be in another cycle of tariffs and retaliations.
Iran, of course, is another item. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said that the two leaders will discuss the Iran war and urge China to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping. Beijing, meanwhile, it seems quite keen to demonstrate that it can play a diplomatic role on Iran, while potentially using the issue to strengthen its leverage in negotiations over Taiwan and perhaps broader US-China tensions. Now, US and Chinese media have described the negotiations as a possible exchange between Washington's so-called 5 Bs, that's Boeing aircraft, beans or beef and beans, or rather soybeans, border of investment and border of trade mechanisms, with Beijing's 3 Ts, which are Taiwan, tariffs, and technology.
So 5 Bs for the U.S. and 3 Ts
That's right.
for
5
China.
Bs, 3 Ts.
And finally, there's speculation that Trump may consult with Xi over potential North Korea engagement. Tell us more about that speculation.
Right, like you said, there's been a large amount of expectation that North Korea will come up as part of their discussions. It looks likely, but it's probable that it's not going to be the focal point of the leaders' discussions. Some former US officials, including former Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell, have said that Trump could ask Xi for some advice on engaging Kim Jong-un. But others, such as Dr. Victor Cha, they argue that Beijing may be more worried than supportive of direct talks between Kim and Trump. He points to Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Pyongyang in early April.
I think the fact that Wang Yi went to North Korea is a sign that the Chinese are concerned that the United States and DPRK may be talking separately about meeting again. Because well, if we look back to Trump 1, China may have played a role initially, but after the United States established a direct communication channel with North Korea, China was completely cut out.
Reflecting on the previous summits between Kim and Trump, Cha says China increased its own summit diplomacy with Kim Jong-un to keep track of developments and shape Pyongyang's behavior. The prospects of Kim-Trump diplomacy do appear rather likely, though, according to Cha and other former US officials that we've spoken to as Arirang, given that President Trump is eager to have a foreign policy success before the November midterm elections. But will a summit in Beijing make or break such prospects? It seems rather unlikely that this will be the venue for a breakthrough, given all the other agenda items that he needs to discuss with Xi Jinping.
Right. Well, the two leaders will have a lot to discuss and to get through this time. Let's see what emerges from the summit. Soo-young, thanks for the coverage.
Lovely to be with you, Tammy.
Korea's economy is showing signs of recovery on strong chip exports and improving consumer demand, though lingering uncertainties over the Middle East conflict continue to pose downside risks. Eun-jin tells us more.
The South Korean economy is projected to expand 2.5% in 2026, up from the previous forecast of 1.9% projected in February by the Korea Development Institute. On Wednesday, the state-run think tank released its May Economic Trends Report, in which it evaluated that the Korean economy has indeed been showing a recovery trend due to exports growing at a high rate led by semiconductors. Chip exports spiked 173.5% year-on-year, marking the highest ever figure for any April. In April, consumer prices rose by 2.6% from a year earlier, higher than in March, which recorded a 2.2% increase, and the fastest pace in 21 months, despite government measures of oil price capping policies and expanded fuel tax cuts. In their monthly economic assessment, the KDI added that domestic demand also continues to improve. However, the institute pointed out that the economic downside risks persist due to the conflict in the Middle East, which has now dragged on for over 2 months. Consumer prices are rising due to the impact of global oil prices shooting up. Despite such downside risks, the KDI reported that South Korea's economic activity improved, led by the services sector. Services sector production rose by 5.1%, led by financial and insurance services, while mining and manufacturing production increased by 3.6% on the back of the strong semiconductor performance. The impact of the Middle East war has not yet been fully reflected across real economic indicators, which suggests that remaining uncertainties could constrain future economic growth. The Consumer Sentiment Index recorded 99.2 in April, falling below the baseline of 100 and dropping from the previous month's 107. Eun-jin, Arirang News.
Korea's two main political parties have selected their candidates for Speaker and Deputy Speaker for the second half of the National Assembly. During its General Assembly on Wednesday, the ruling Democratic Party tapped Jo Jong-sik, a six-term lawmaker, as its nominee for Speaker. The party also nominated Nam In-sun for Deputy Speaker. Meanwhile, the main opposition People Power Party also convened its own caucus of meeting on the same day to elect a four-term lawmaker Park Deok-keum for the opposition-held Deputy Speaker position. Now, the DP plans to hold a plenary session on May 20th to vote on the new Assembly leadership. But the PPP insists the schedule should be agreed upon via bipartisan talks. The National Assembly Speaker is nominated by the largest party, while the two Deputy Speaker posts are shared between the ruling and main opposition parties. Here in Korea, one of the world's fastest aging societies, artificial intelligence is becoming part of everyday caregiving for older adults living alone. Now, for some, AI is there in moments of crisis, and for others, it's become a companion. Kim Junong has this report.
혹시 밤새 잠은 편안히 주무셨어요?
네, 잘 잤습니다.
For 77-year-old Jung Yun-hee, a daily conversation now comes from an unexpected companion, artificial intelligence. The care call service Talking Buddy, developed by Neighbor Cloud for the elderly, once helped save Jung's life. Just as Jung was suffering severe stomach pain alone at home, the AI called to check on her. After saying she was in pain, an ambulance soon arrived, allowing her to undergo emergency surgery for an acute hernia.
To me, it is a blessing in my life. Doctors told me it could have become very serious if I hadn't gotten surgery that day. I don't get to talk with my family very often, so I can't always share my day with them. But with AI, I can. It listens, responds to me, and that brings me joy.
This AI call service keeps in touch with older people living alone, with many of them struggling with illness or loneliness. It aims to build lasting relationships through memory-based conversations, tailored to each person's daily life.
Conversations with the AI are monitored by staff at care centers. Most calls are screened by the AI itself, but missed calls or signs of unusual behavior are classified as potential risks. Human supervisors then step in to contact the individual directly and respond if necessary.
In April, a woman in her 70s said during a call that she had been assaulted by her husband. The AI identified it as a warning, and staff later reported it as suspected elder abuse.
People aged 65 and older in Korea are expected to make up 21.6% of the population this year, with the figure projected to exceed 40% by 2050. But the caregiving workforce is struggling to keep pace with the country's rapidly aging population. Korea is expected to need an additional 990,000 care workers by 2043 just to keep up with current demand. AI technology is now emerging as a solution to help fill that gap.
Care in the past was largely reactive, stepping in only when help was needed. But now, it is shifting toward a more proactive approach, using daily data to detect risks early and connect people with support. With that, AI is expected to become a key part of the digital safety net.
With its population aging at an unprecedented pace, Korea is embracing AI technology as a new part of everyday caregiving. Kim Junong, Arirang News.
Tomorrow, temperatures will climb even higher. Seoul is expected to reach 31 degrees Celsius, bringing unusually hot conditions for this time of year. However, inland areas will see large day-to-night temperature swings, so please take care. Meanwhile, brief showers are possible over the mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province through tonight, with around 5 millimeters of rain expected. Showers are also forecast for Jeolla-do and the inland western areas of Gyeongsangnam-do provinces tomorrow. Tomorrow, UV levels will be very high across much of the country, so don't forget your sunscreen. Across the Seoul metropolitan area, pollen levels are expected to be high, so if you're heading outdoors, be sure to wear a mask or sunglasses for protection. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 15 degrees, Chuncheon at 14 degrees, Busan at 15 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 31 degrees, Daejeon at 30 degrees, Gwangju at 28 degrees. Looking ahead, early summer heat will continue, along with large day-to-night temperature swings.
That's all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.